Hi, Jim Laird from J&M Strength and Conditioning. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about something I think that's overlooked by most people, especially with the advent of the sport of fitness, is basically how people's daily activities affects their body and their ability to exercise. I see this constantly every day with the clients that I work with. What people do all day, whether it's sitting at a desk or their occupation, is going to affect the way their ability to exercise, especially in the long term. I'm going to give you a couple of specific examples. When I'm working with like a young golfer or a baseball player who basically plays year-round, who doesn't really get a break, I don't really program any swing side rotation. So basically, if someone is batting this way or golfing this way, I'm basically not going to do any of that in their training because they're already doing enough of that. So I'm going to work on the opposite side, especially turning that hip, turning the hip and the toe, and teaching them to go the opposite direction. And the funny thing is by teaching their body to do that, it actually opens their swing side up, because if you continue to hammer that swing side over and over again, they're just basically going to become so wound up that their body's going to basically shut them down eventually. It'd be different if I have somebody who I'm working with that has a distinct off season, and we get to do some general stuff to get them kind of moving better again, and then we go into like a phase of preparatory phase for their season. That's a little different. But when I'm dealing with kids that's all they're doing is swinging a bat one direction all the time, I like to teach them how to go the other direction, as well as building in like a base level of movement. Another big one I see is like a hairdresser. Okay, so they're spending their entire life, literally 8 hours a day, up with one arm. They get this like high trap syndrome. Their scapula's stuck up here. Just a side note, if you're looking for like detailed assessment on how to do that kind of stuff, I looked at like Bill Hartman, Gray Cook, Charlie Weingroff. There's a lot of great people, Mike Reinhold. These are all great folks you can look at that have all sorts of great information on assessment. Mike Robertson is a great guy, has tons of stuff on assessment. Eric Cressy. These are all names that you can look in for more detailed type assessments. Eric's got some great stuff with the shoulder. Those are the kind of guys I look to basically see how I need to be assessing my athletes and how I need to be assessing my clients. But the hairdresser is a big one I see. I train a lot of hairdressers. So if you're going to work with somebody like that, you need to teach them to be able to get that scapula to come glide down, do some breathing work to get those upper traps and everything to relax. You're probably not going to be able to do it. So in your programming, you're not going to want to program a lot of push-ups. You're not going to want to program a lot of things that are going to make that upper trap get tighter, and so they can't, you're going to be programming a lot of like one-arm pull-downs so that they can learn how to get that scapula down and get it to stretch and come down and get everything pulled down. So you got to take that into account, because if you load a dysfunction even more, okay, they're going to end up even more dysfunctional. You'll end up with neck issues and all sorts of stuff. So you got to be very careful in your exercise selection not to make someone more dysfunctional. Another one that I see is people stuck in extension. So they're basically stuck in extension. They're like interior pelvic tilt. And if you load that, it's going to get even worse. So what you're going to have to do with them is teach them how to get their rib cage down, teach them how to get their core braced properly, strengthen their glutes so they can do squats and deadlifts without going into extension, like a high threshold strategy, so that you're going to be able to train them over the long term. If you throw them into lots of squats and deadlifts, especially if you're just doing them for time, you're going to basically reinforce that dysfunction, and you're going to end up with a problem in the long run. The big one I see around here too is people that ride horses. Okay, so people that do equestrian stuff, especially being here in Kentucky, inside of their legs, they're squeezing that horse. They ride with the horse, so their core becomes kind of sloppy, and they basically end up with no glutes. So they're all quads, hip flexors, and adductors. And so if you throw a bar on that person's back, they're going to have all sorts of knee collapse, valgus, all sorts of crazy stuff. They're not going to be able to hinge really well. So what you have to do with them is work from the inside out. You have to get their core functional, where they can get their rib cage down and activate, do some breathing type stuff, and then you have to basically teach them to open their hips up. I use a lot of box squats and things like that to teach them to open their hips and to use their glutes, and I do tons of chain bridges, glute bridges, all sorts of things like that in order to get their glutes functioning, to get their core functioning, so they can actually squat properly. Where if you load that when they're, load them when their abductors are doing all the work, when their hip flexors are doing all the work, you're going to end up with dysfunction. So when you're working with someone, take into account what they're doing every day, before you throw them into an exercise program, especially one that just has a lot of general movement, because you might actually set them up for disaster in the long run by loading bad patterns. And unfortunately, you know, people sitting in desks all day, a lot of people with their occupations, you're going to have to take that into account for your programming. Something for you guys to think about.